Hello and welcome. My name is Bill Reeks. I lead a company called the Gramercy Institute, and we are a think tank for senior marketers from major financial firms. It is indeed my pleasure to deliver to our audience here the fourth of four in a series that we call our Agency Brilliance series. The concept is simple. We have assembled this is the fourth, four different panels of agency experts that happen to have significant experience and expertise in the financial sector. And we're talking about the issues that are driving financial services marketing today. Today we have a theme. Our theme is creativity or creative in financial services marketing. And to be a little bit more specific, we're calling it the creative process in financial. That all said, let me move on to a more interesting part of this series, and that is our panelists. And if I may, I'll ask each of our panelists to please introduce yourselves. And I'll start with Jim Misener, if I may. And Jim, would you please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and anything else you care to share?
Sure. No, thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join. I'm Jim Misener. I'm a principal partner at 50,000 Feet. So 50,000 Feet is a wholly owned, privately held brand consultancy and creative agency. So we work with clients from a strategic brand positioning, brand strategy perspective, as well as have the wherewithal and capability to execute creatively across channel and across experience. I'm sitting and I'm calling in from Chicago today, and I was telling the other panelists I'm returning to our New York team and our New York office later today, so I'm super excited. So in about an hour and a half, I head out here from here. So I'm glad to be here today, proud member of the group here. As you know from our website, we work across kind of all ilk of financial services, deep asset management experience, financial investment, brokerage, lots of exchange, which is exciting for us, and card management and fintech. So pleasure to be here.
Well, it is a pleasure to have you, Jim, and just hearing the different categories within financial, it is extensive, and it's a pleasure to have you on board, given your marketing expertise, your creative expertise, and your financial expertise. So thank you, sir. Jill Deardorff, I shall move on to you now, and I'm going to ask you to please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and about your agency that goes by the same name.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Bill, very much for having me on today's panel. I think, creativity in all its forms is very important to me. As you asked before, by way of background, I'm a writer by trade. So I guess I come to the creative process somewhat trained and naturally. I think that there is plenty of runway for creative and the creative process in everything in financial services. Deardorff is a brand agency. We work in B2B, B2C with intermediaries, deep experience across asset management, as well as in all the other areas of financial services. I would say that recently we have definitely, since the pandemic, seen a shift. We've seen much more emphasis placed on creative because of really the, not having in-person events. And so social media, technology, microsites, those have become the ways that many of our clients have had and continue to have, and we don't think that that will go away, to communicate with their clients. And so then you compete in the marketplace for share of mind with every other type of creative that's out there. So recently we've been fortunate in positioning, naming, developing visual articulation for new firms in fintech, in RIAs, and also in thought leadership initiatives. A lot of work in LinkedIn campaigns, a lot with animation, video, storytelling. We're super excited about what the future holds for financial services. And thank you again for having me today.
Jill, I love your enthusiasm and I love having you on this panel. And thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward for your deeper remarks and thoughts as we move forward. And thank you again. Paul Leibowitz, I will move on to you, sir. And would you please tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and your agency?
Thank you, Bill. And thank you, everybody else on the panel. It was really good to chat with you beforehand. It's a good group. And I agree with Jill. I mean, creativity is the defining factor. You know, it really does separate. And I always encourage my clients to really take that creative approach because, you know, financial services, a lot of the marketing can be similar. So we try to really, you know, push that part of it. I've had Leibowitz 30 years. I started it when I was 12. And yeah, but, you know, we're here in New York City. And we're all back in the office and we're proud of that. We're here 4 days a week and my employees really like it because, you know, part of the creative process is the collaboration. And as much as we say we're going to be on a Zoom call at 9 o'clock or 12 o'clock, whatever, and collaborate, you know, I just think the spontaneity that we get really sparks the creativity. And I think my team likes it too. So we've had really good time. Everybody's in a great mood now that we're back. You know, we did great during the pandemic too. I felt fortunate to work in financial services. You know, I used to want to work in, let's say, fashion or something like that. And, you know, that went away. So I was kind of glad that went away, but well, not really. But I do feel like financial services held its own really well, and we're proud to be part of that. Leibowitz is a brand agency. We do research, naming, strategy, core messaging, design, content, animation, video, you know, full suite, social media. So it's a full gamut of deliverables, and we're really happy to be here today. Thank you.
Well, and I am delighted that you are able to be with us as well. So thank you, Paul, for that introduction, and I look forward to your comments. Nick, would you please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and about Gate 39, if you would?
Yeah, of course. Well, first off, thanks for having me, Bill. Excited to be here. So yeah, I'm Nick Landsberger. I am the lead designer over at Gate 39 Media. We are a technology and marketing solutions agency, and we specialize a lot in financial, agriculture clients for the most part. We do a variety of creative solutions for these clients. I mostly have a hand in a lot of the marketing assets, everything from branding, whether it be logos, any redesigns, or any other marketing collateral they might need from a day-to-day basis, everything to their digital assets. So new websites, new platforms or portals or new solutions for mobile apps, we kind of handle all of that there. We also provide an array of media solutions for producing video or other assets that our clients kind of need. And we've seen a lot of progress in the creative in aspects of our business here. We've been working a lot on trying to focus our process a little bit more towards how do the individual creative solutions we provide really help elevate the business. So whether that be how can we kind of change, you know, the landscape of something as simple as a one-sheeter to really be something that a client can use to help drive their marketing, or whether it be rearranging the layout of the blog to become something that's a little bit more interactive. We've been able to find that by using design and the creative way of thinking, we can really see an impact, not only in our work, but like a benefit for the clients as well. And they've been really responsive to that.
Well, it is our pleasure and an honor to have you with us, Nick. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And Mark, last but certainly not least, would you please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background, a little bit more about TAG,
Sure.
et cetera?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm looking forward to talking to the other panelists about creativity. And I think, you know, my background, I'm the general manager of creative production at TAG for the Americas. So I'm coming at this sort of more from a production perspective. TAG is actually one of the world's largest independent marketing agency providers from a content creation perspective. So we provide content for agencies and brands alike, and specifically within the financial services sector as well. My background is in kind of tier 1 TV commercials and creative production, working alongside agencies across TV, print, digital, and the like, and being exposed to TAG. They actually run the full gamut of creative production across, you know, right from TV right down to, like Nick was saying, kind of one pages and brochures as well. So seeing the full gamut of the type of branding and assets that the financial services sector commission gives you a really good insight into the creative process. So I'm looking forward to talking about that with the team.
Well, terrific. And we are so pleased to have you with us. And I must say, speaking about the panel in general, I mean, on one hand, it's such a specifically interested panel, right? Creativity, financial services, marketing. This is the funnel that we've put put us all through, and this is the great panel that we come up with. At the same time, there's great diversity on this panel, and I love that. And I'm looking forward to a fun, vibrant conversation. Before we move on, now that we've met all of you, I do want you to meet some friends of mine, which are our sponsors, and I'll introduce them by name. And they are Dianomi, Investing Channel, and Additions Financial. I wish to point out that this entire webinar, as well as this discussion, could not take place without their support, and how much we all appreciate them. So thank you to our sponsors. So that all said, let me begin with Jim. Jim, I'll go to you if I may. Now, we have called this, or referred to this specific webinar, as the creative process. And I want to talk to you about that word process. Do you feel that there is a process to delivering great creative for your clients, or is it not that at all? Is there no way to sort of itemize the steps that are needed in order to get to the right creative?
Yeah, great question. So I'll answer it with a hedge. How about that?
That's acceptable.
And I'm a Libra, so certainly there. I mean, I think. Well, I shouldn't say we would all agree that there's a rough-hewn process, right? There's a broad canvas on which we all paint, probably, and it's most creative, right? In category is, we would say, insights-led and audience-driven, right? So, beyond kind of the brand speak and marketing speak, we want to make certain that whatever we kind of fuel and fire against is driven by the insight that we've gathered from data of all kinds and stripes. In terms of the other half of that equation, audience-led, whatever the execution, whatever the creative solution or the experience we create, and we would argue it doesn't matter whether it's an app, whether it's a digital experience, it can be immersive of any kind. It needs to deliver on the needs and the hopes and the aspirations, right, of the audience. So across that journey, there's many shareholders and there's many stakeholders and there's many audience types. We know there's a proliferation of channels. So fundamentally, though, at the end of the day, we try to design a process that keeps the audience needs in mind. So, like some of the other panelists, we do foster a studio environment. So we're hybrid. So we're, some pure play digital for some of our team members. Some members come in every day, and in between we facilitate that exchange. So the process for us is always driven from strategy, facilitated from great client service throughout the process, to make certain that we're listening and learning along the way, that the client is participatory and feels comfortable. We feel the better service throughout the process, the more you trust your team, and the more trust that's part of that team, the better creative that comes out. And then when we actually get maybe closer to the canvas, closer to the paint on the brushes, so to speak, we like to have a complete unfettered environment, and we like to say, okay, well, it's absolutely blue sky across all channels, across all possibility. And then again, you bring that back to testing and evaluating, does it fit a need? So long process, I mean, it's kind of a broad, long response to probably what seems like a long process. I would say too, and probably you're going to hear this from other panelists, that process is becoming increasingly quicker for more and more clients. So that could be a topic of conversation. We're seeing the contraction or the rapidity of, we're doing projects in, really a matter of days that would have taken weeks or months before. And whether that's because of increased digitization or need within the market, the process has really become much more agile and much more prototypical.
Yeah. Jim, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Jill, I'm going to move on to you if I may, and I'm going to ask you an identical question with the predication of, do you agree with some of Jim's points, and maybe give me your thoughts about, is creative a process as we work with our clients?
So I absolutely agree with Jim. I love that you brought up trust, because I think trust is really important, both from the perspective of a client, knowing that you've listened, you understand their marketing objectives, and what success looks like, right? As well as internally, that creatively, you create a safe environment for people to brainstorm and to share ideas, even like wild, crazy ideas, that when they say and think about it, they know that that particular idea will never see the light of day, but in that there could be some piece of inspiration that ultimately ends or lands with the final solution. I also wanted to follow up on what Jim said about like speed. So what we found, so in addition to financial services, we do quite a bit of work in helping to change behaviors, even with government, and like don't drink and drive, don't text and drive. And it's a really difficult area because it's 18 to 34-year-old males like to grab their attention, right? And change their behavior. And so we've done a lot of that for years now on social media. And we've seen this switch now in financial services really much more in social and digital, in tech, in all areas of technology, and the turn on that creative is much faster. However, the process, I think, in some respects is still the same because you've done the research in whatever that subject area is, both from an audience perspective, your client's perspective, like understanding their solutions or their strategies or their services, understanding the competitive environment. And so it's almost like a weekly update on like what's new in that area, but yet you still need to create creatively like a whole on campaign again.
Yeah.
So we have definitely seen this faster turnaround need due to the pandemic. And, the switch in the mix, the marketing mix of financial services clients.
Yeah. Jill, I'm going to ask you a chicken or the egg kind of question, meaning I don't really expect you to have a definitive answer for me, but the answer is probably both. I'll tell you the answer already. It's both. But let me ask the question anyway. A client walks in, call it a new client or an existing client with a new financial services product to market. You listen to his product, you listen to his needs, and you automatically sort of say, okay, we need this kind of message and this kind of media platform. And I'll say, like, what comes first? What do you determine to be the first? Or is it never that easy to say? I mean, do you say, okay, here's the message, but I don't know how to distribute it, or I know how it's going to be distributed, but I haven't figured out the message yet. How might you answer that question?
So I would say I would start with the message. So, however, if the client knew the media platform, because creativity is in the media platform as well. And even with you starting with the message or what the objective or, the key marketing idea to communicate, like the creativity component of it could come from, and this is the chicken and the egg, could come from the media platform as well, right? So, but typically we would start with the message because, I mean, most of our clients want something that is somewhat media agnostic so that it has legs over time. So even if, the launch is set up to occur in a certain way, over time, they want to be able to utilize it, across different channels.
Yeah. Jill, thank you. You very diplomatically answered that Solomon-worthy question. Paul, let me move on to you, my friend. And I'm going to ask you, for your take on this same question about the creative process. And if you do feel it is a process, can you explain to me, for one such as myself who is not working at an agency, how it might function?
It's both. It's process and serendipity, but it's mostly process. We employ a 5-step process of research, which drives strategy, which drives content and design, and then implementation, and of course, evolution, because nothing ever sits still. And everything we do follows that process. But, I mentioned at the outset, collaboration is key, and it's within our team and it's within the client. And it's a series of conversations that happen that sort of drives that. But first and foremost, we have to define the problem and research the problem. And that sets the strategy. From there, you can unleash whatever it is going to be, whether it's great writing or great visuals. But it has to be something that's unique and different, not seen before, right? To really move the needle, so to speak. but it's collaboration. And I find that's really the way it is. Most ideas, we collaborate, but most ideas for me don't come at a table or at a certain time. It starts the conversation and I finish it in my head later on when I'm walking home. To me, my best ideas are in transit.
Yeah. And that's fun. And that was going to be my question that I was going to ask you, like, would you say that a majority of you enter a conference room, you have 6 or 8 or however many really smart people who understand, who you get along with really well. Or is it more of a, I'm whatever, walking home, driving home. And I guess your answer is a pretty good one, that maybe it germinates within the meeting and it might pop into your head.
Yeah, but we're a full service team. So we've got account managers, we do our in-house development, designers, print, UX, UI, and at every junction, someone in the team is going to be involved, and they all bring different things. Yeah. And I have presented work that an intern has designed, and that has won the day. So I take inspiration from everybody. I don't really rely on like people's roles. Once we get in the meeting and meet, everybody's naked, so to speak, and they just bring their best ideas. It's not your title or your thing. And it's always with the client. I really have to go back to that because, we have to define their problem and they know their business better than we do. We know financial services. We work in asset management, wealth management, insurance companies, launching companies, working with existing brands, but it's still, these clients, they live it every day. And we respect that they bring this to the table. So they are the 6th person, and it's a very key person.
That's interesting. And is that, I'm asking you, is that unusual? I mean, so you involve
I hope not.
the client in the
not.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I hope not. I hope it's not unusual.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I mean is I'm an old agency guy, and in my opinion, it would have, like nobody's quite at ease the way they might be if they're amongst their peers than they would be if the client were in the room to come up with an out there idea. But speak to that.
We're a boutique. We're 12 people, right? And I think we don't have attitude. And we're very welcoming. And I think we disarm people. So yes, they're part of the team. That's what I think it is. Yeah.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. Nick, I'll move on to you if I may with this same line of questioning about if you all consider creative to be a process and how that process may play out in your world.
Yeah, definitely. It is definitely a process, and I think just by the nature of our industry, we need to make sure it keeps that structure. We need to make sure that, again, the clients are involved. And I think the biggest thing that it kind of takes on when it comes to how we approach our creative process here at Gate 39 Media is that trust, in the sense where, in order to have the creative work impact the marketing and stuff, and then to benefit the client, we need to make sure that everyone is kind of making sure that the objectives are clearly stated in mind because of how one thing moves to the next. So by the time stuff comes to, for instance, design, we already have an idea in terms of what either the message or what media is going to help communicate that message and how we're going to achieve that. And then with that, myself and my team will kind of take a look and say, well, what is the best way to help present that? You can often change the way a message communicates, or changes the way a client can perceive any of the creative work that we do, just based on how we present it within the design. And so going back to the trust, I think it's really important that as we move stuff along in the process to achieve that goal that we set out with them, we need to trust that when we bring them in, we have our initial kickoff meetings and stuff, we have an understanding of where they want to go and how they see themselves. And it's with that we can kind of help guide them and provide our industry expertise to help achieve a better solution. And so it's that relationship with the client that kind of helps make the solution all the more, I think, authentic and have the most impact for them.
Yeah, that's again, I say again because Paul brought up a similar point about having the client really in a central role in the process. And I'll ask you the same that I asked Paul. Does that stymie at all some of those, some of the out there ideas that might come about, or does it complement the most creative thinking?
I think it can be both. I think it's more so of a spectrum in the sense where, and that might seem like a very political answer, but I think it's it really is the case. In my experience, often we do a lot of client interaction and we do a lot of meetings with them to kind of understand what they need. And I think the best way to look at it is in terms of how involved someone wants to be. And again, go back to that trust, the level of trust in, I think, us to achieve the right messaging. If they often want to be more involved, the trend typically creatively is, I think, a lot more refined and a little bit more focused in terms of where they want the direction to go, which is totally fine. I mean, this is the clients, and again, are the experts of their own domain. But if they kind of come to us and they say, we kind of have an idea of this is what we want to do with our marketing, but we need you guys to kind of really come up with those ideas, then that's when we can, get a little bit more creative or come up with a little bit more eccentric ideas initially, and maybe think a little bit more outside the box, just with our own unique perspective. And oftentimes, either end of that client interaction spectrum is where you'll kind of find the best solution to meet their needs. And it also just makes the process all that more productive. If we have a relationship where there's a lot of back and forth and there's a lot of steering, but they also want something to be a little bit more outside the box, that's just a mix that is really tough to handle. So it's about kind of navigating that conversation with them. That makes the process, I think, work.
Yeah. Listen, Nick, thank you so much for your thinking right there. Mark, I will move on to you, and I'm going to ask you the same question. And I'm sorry to be you're the fifth of five to answer on this response, and it's hard to get creative when you're the fifth one in line. But I will also ask you to respond to, if anything particularly resonates with what you've heard already, or if there's a whole nother thought that you wish to add about the idea of creative being a process.
I have a lot of thoughts. Where would you like me to start? So I love hearing the process, right? Because my background is very much in that kind of process mapping and getting a client from A to B, right? I'm actually a firm believer that the process starts at the pitch, right? You've won that client because they've seen something in your pitch to them that they believe is valuable to their business, right? You might have pitched, to Nick's point, something eccentric, something out there, something different. And I believe that before you've even started coming up with the ideas or looking at the audience or looking at the strategy, you've won that client over by pitching your values as a business. And I think that actually informs some of that early creative, which I think is really interesting, because we at TAG, we win a vast majority of our work through pitching. And a big part of pitching is visualizing the idea. Now, the agency might have come to us with the idea already. They might have come to us with a series of storyboards, but they're coming to our business to put our spin on it because they've seen something in our portfolio that they believe is going to add value to their audience. So I think that pitching is a critical initiator in a lot of these processes. And then something actually resonated with me at the start that Jim was talking about, which was the sort of insights-led, audience-driven notion. I find that fascinating because I was actually going back before the meeting and I was looking at what I considered to be kind of tentpole creative from my generation of financial services ads. And I was looking at like the Trade Babies, and I was looking at like the Barclays roller coaster, and I was looking at the Visa runner as he's running through all of the different scenes. Those ads were in a sort of heyday of television, right? Like they were kind of like, you produce this great big brand anthem as a financial services company, and that covers your audience, right? There's no real specificity within it. It's your audience from 18 to 70, whatever it is. You put it out there, and that's how you roll. And I think now it's so different. Like the landscape is so different. How do you take one message and apply it to such different segments within that process? We've seen the development of like dynamic content optimization and being able to push hyper localized and hyper specific creative out there to individuals. You might serve up an ad in Florida to somebody who's sitting by a beach, and you might serve them up a mojito as opposed to somebody in Canada who's in a winter environment who might be by a log fire. Like, you can customize the creative on that level. And I think that part of the process to me is fascinating, and it goes down to the audience insights, the media plan, and how you tailor your creative to that. And I think that's fascinating to me.
I think that is such an astute observation about the change that we've seen. And to that point, let me ask you a follow-up question. When I was, anyway, 20 years ago, right? When I was in the agency business, when I was in the agency business, there were, and just the way the office was designed, this is our creative department. Yeah. This is our media department. Yeah. This is our, account services, and then admin and accounting. My question to you is, do people still wear those kind of designations when they're walking and talking, or is it more, you can't really tell who's who because the media message kind of thing is so intertwined at this point?
Interesting. I think that we do see the blurring of a lot of boundaries between the processes. We're seeing media teams sort of going into kind of analytics or into testing or into insights and into data. We're seeing creative teams going into production. We're seeing the blurring of all of these boundaries between the different aspects of coming up with a creative idea. And in that, we're seeing more people wearing many hats from a process perspective. So, on my side, like a creative director could be an art director or copywriter as well. Maybe they've got some insight on production. Maybe they love live action directing on the side. There's that kind of many hats mentality. And I think, we've talked about the timelines as well. A lot of brands are kind of, adopting this kind of agile sprint methodology. You don't have the luxury to put 15 people on a campaign anymore. You have to have a small, quick, nimble team of people that can ideate and generate content that much quicker. And it's almost opposite to what you would think would happen in some respects. You're targeting a bigger audience with more content and having to generate more material, but with a smaller team essentially. But obviously the tech layer that's in the middle is the thing that's sort of facilitating you being able to do that. And it's quite an interesting sort of full circle shift, really. I liken financial services a little bit to healthcare, and where healthcare was sort of 10, 15 years ago. You could never use the color red because it symbolized death, right? If you're in healthcare. But they've come full circle. They embrace a metaphor. They're very abstract. They embrace new technology quite regularly. And it's actually a really fun place to play from a creative messaging perspective. I think financial services is actually a little bit behind in that regard. I think that they could be more adventurous, but I feel like the stereotype that financial services conforms to sometimes holds it back, right? Stiff upper lip, or kind of, blue collar, kind of like they could be more adventurous, and that's interesting. Yeah.
Listen, thank you so much, Mark, for those thoughts. Let me move on to another line of questioning, if I may, and I'll pick on you first, Paul, for this one. And this is such a simple question with such a complex answer. What is great creative? What makes great creative? And to a guy like you, right, when you are exposed to great creative, particularly in financial, but you can go outside of that if you need to, like, what is it that stops you in your tracks and says, wow, that is great creative? So how might you address this question?
I think great creative hits both an emotional and intellectual nerve at the same time, right? It has to grab you. And I think financial services is probably an excellent example of creative in that way, because it does have to hit you intellectually as well, because you're dealing with people's money and their future. So it has to make sense, but it has to tap into that emotional side that hooks you. I use this phrase when I look at something: does it bring a smile to my eye? Like, does it stop me in my tracks and say, that's different? That's a way of executing that, or that's a different way of thinking, or it's a great concept that solves a particular problem. So, great creative has to be great creative because it solves a problem. It just can't be beautiful or funny or clever. It has to make you, especially in financial services, there's a call to action, right? Whether it's a digital campaign we do, or it's, brand refresh or a new company, there's a call to action. So that's great creative. It makes you act.
I love your response, and I love it because it is a response for financial creative. And I know that the parameters are much more broad when we're talking about selling, I don't know, Coca-Cola or peanut butter or something, where it doesn't have to be intellectually, there's no intellectual deliverable to the value proposition. That it's just like, I can just appeal to somebody's sensibilities. Or, McDonald's, you see two high school kids dating, and, isn't that nice? And McDonald's in the background. There has to be a real hook and an angle and a intellectual understanding that is conveyed in that same message. And so I really like the way you've responded.
Thank you. I agree with that. No, thank you.
I think thank you.
We work in higher ed as well, and we also work with one of the larger cable companies. And it's a little different, but not really. It still has to hit the mark. I think if you're a good writer or a good designer, with enough research, I could design the world's best washing machine. You know, if you're a good designer, you're a good designer. If you're a good writer, you're a good writer. It's about solving a problem.
Yeah. Paul, thank you very much. Jill, I'll ask you the same question, and it's okay if you want to say, you know, I agree with Paul, but what in your opinion makes for great creative, particularly with our sights set on financial?
So I think great creative moves you. It moves you to share it. It moves you to engage in it. It moves you to talk about it. And similarly, we did go look, and we looked at like the E-Trade baby ads, and we're trying to come up with like, what is the great creative currently in our collective like memory now for financial services. And I think probably for me, like the closest I can come to that is what Progressive is doing now. And, you know, when you look at the range of, you know, with Flo, you know, with Dr. Rick, and then like even more recently, they've done this partnership because the new Addams Family movie is coming out. So they've done this animated series of ads. And so I also think like when I think about that evolution, like great creative has legs. So it's not just, you know, a one-off awesome ad or awesome, you know, social media campaign. It has legs over time. And so that's what I would say. It moves you, and it's enduring.
Yeah, Jill, thank you. And I will say that it harkens back to some of Jim's original comments too, and in this way. And I'm speaking of the Progressive example, and you know, I read an article that, and it holds very likely as I describe it to you, that, you know, it wasn't just like everybody agreed, like, okay, this Flo character is just going to captivate our nation, okay, and I, you know, and she's whatever, an eccentric, old-fashioned looking kind of, you know, it was more like his trial and error, right? More of like, that has, I think that has legs. Let's try it, sort of fun, and let's see if it has legs. And it had legs, you know, and to all the extensions that you just pointed out. So anyway, I think your response was spot on and very practical for this conversation. So thank you. Jim, I will move to you now, and I'll ask you for this same question that I've asked both Paul and Jill about, in your opinion, what does make for great creative? Feel free to answer that anyway.
I'll say all the above. So I totally agree with Paul. It's head and heart, and I totally agree with Jill. It should move you. I mean, if I were to be additive, I would say alongside being message driven, it could and should be experience driven. So when we think about financial brands, and I think there's a blur or a porosity to that definition, right? So as Mark talks about the adjacency of healthcare possibly to financial services and how we look at that and how we talk about it, I think that's really interesting. And I think, you know, it's a creative panel, so we have to talk about Apple at some point on this panel from a brand experience and a customer experience perspective, although Apple is one of the rising stars within the financial services, you know, global, you know, community in terms of its ubiquitous pay and its terms of its right around privacy and security and user experience, and how so much of financial services, I think, is about creating experiences that increase access, right? Great creative can do that. So I think Apple, in terms of its strategy around embedding products and services that are financially related outside of only Apple Pay to more card products to additional products, are pretty striking in how it's reaching and integrating and redefining financial services for maybe a newer or a younger generation. I think coming out, you know, the additional point that might be additive to the discussion is, if we can say, as we're emerging from the pandemic, and I say that respectfully for all of us here and everyone in the world, because it's been unprecedented for 18 months, many brands have leaned in to help tell stories and share stories and help be part of a solution to something larger than what their category may have been defined. And we've actually gotten the great benefit and great opportunity to work with many of our global financial services clients to help storytell and lean in and be part of public affairs. And certainly public health is closely aligned, as we know, with economic development and financial well-being, and many great, and it does relate to, I think, creative in the sense that many great financial brand experiences are making that leap to say, how can we really help change the world, and how can we really help change lives for the better, in pretty interesting, compelling ways. So, you know, they're creating platforms that are larger than, I don't want to say they're larger than head and heart, because they still fundamentally need to resonate and move you. They need to, but they really can change the world for the better. So long answer. So
no, that's a great answer, and I couldn't agree with you more. That, you know, there's another element out there, and that's the societal good. And I will say, if ever any of us has looked through some old ads, whether it's in an something on an old TV ad or an old financial ad, in print, that element doesn't exist. It's all about chest beating and look at me, spend with me. So there is something bigger out there right now that makes for great creative. So it's a terrific point. Thank you, Jim. Mark, let me move on to you. We're going to stay with this same thread, but I kind of have a twist on this question. And please, you may comment on anyone's responses so far, but I'm going to ask you, is it possible to have great creative if it's not moving the needle for your client?
I think it's possible to have great creative, but it might move the needle in a way that you didn't expect. We don't always necessarily understand the audience reaction to something. It might go in a different way than you thought it was going to go. I think it's an interesting question. For example, I don't know if this is quite creatively led, but I think it's certainly branding led. If we look at something like Robinhood, for example, right? Like, that's an interesting brand at the moment because it's a real disruptor brand in terms of the way that it's trying to break down accessibility into the stock market, right? Now, did Robinhood set out, maybe they did given their name, to disrupt that marketplace and actually create quite a divisive brand, essentially? I'm curious as to what the other panelists think about that brand specifically and their creative approach to the marketplace, because I feel like it's very different than what we have stereotypically seen.
Thank you very much. And I'll let anyone chime in if anyone cares to buzz in on this one or raise your hand to respond. Anyone care to offer your opinion? Yeah, Jim, go right ahead.
I almost brought up Robinhood, honestly. I'm glad to meet Mark in this panel because it's super, I love his thinking. I love everyone's thinking. Who knows whether they set out to be so disruptive? Probably. I mean, I don't know. We don't know. I don't have that insight, although from a challenger brand perspective, they certainly shone a light on themselves and their market. And yeah. I think you're seeing a lot of similar challenger brand tactics within digital currency as a whole. And I think digital currency is a really interesting area within financial services that hugely divisive from a perspective. And it has implications from an ESG and environmental sustainability, as well as inclusion and accessibility, and quite interesting, even a sovereign perspective, right? And how we can relate from a global international perspective around the world, as countries and sovereign states. So who knows what Robinhood was thinking? I think you got to look at the name, though, and you got to think, there must have been a twinkle in someone's eye to think they were out to have at least spark a conversation of a wider debate. And I think that brands can, really step up to the plate. Yeah. So, sometimes provoke and start those conversations. And pretty interesting. Yeah.
What I find interesting about Robinhood specifically is that they have adopted an incredibly digital first, digital native approach to their creative. Now their creative is highly functional, right? You will just get targeted relentlessly, right, with their ads on Instagram or Facebook. So they know who they're targeting. It's insight led and audience driven, exactly like we were talking about at the start. I love that phrase. And they know who they're going after, and they're doing it really well. They're not necessarily going with big tentpole brand anthems that describe who they are. They don't really talk about who they are, but they do it incredibly well from a functional perspective, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, it seems like they definitely understand their brand. They understand what their space, what their spot is in this space, and their brand emanates that. And you know, and that's tricky business, and it seems like they nailed it.
I think they're attacking a very untapped financial services market that has not been challenged for decades, right? Like we always target institutional investors, people that have got, you know, decent funds, or the common garden investor or person. We don't really go after the young, right? Like the young retail investors that suddenly are making millions on investing in GME because suddenly some Reddit post somewhere has driven a boom in it. Like that's the disruption, and I find that you've got to admire it. Whether or not you want to call it great creative is an interesting one. Yeah. It's moved the needle, right? So
yeah.
Listen, thanks. Thanks so much for that line of questioning. That was fun. Nick, let me ask you, and I'm going to ask you if you would can you enumerate, you know, what are the qualities, and again, I don't mean it in a list fashion. I just mean what comes to mind when you think about great creative. What qualities do you look for when you're thinking about great creative? And as I say, specific as it might relate to financial, but you can go broader than that if you wish.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think it has to do with a lot of kind of what everyone said here. I think something that Jill mentioned about it having legs, I think is something that I think I like to look at a lot. But I think if I had to kind of give what makes great creative kind of like a one-word short answer to a more complicated question, is I would probably say it needs to be strong. It kind of needs to get results. And what I mean by that is not necessarily like what it projects or what does it kind of communicate in a sense. I think great creative just has to be something that can be effective, and we might not necessarily know what that is at the time. I think at least my role as a designer is to best influence that and you know, utilize my skill set, do the research, and I think put together what I believe and would stand behind would be that answer. But I think it's something that we might not necessarily know till later down the line. We talk about a little bit more out of left field ideas or something, the E-Trade baby. Again, I think it's really funny that we are all possibly thinking about that as an example early on within this panel, because those kind of commercials, I believe we mentioned Progressive. I love a lot of car insurance commercials because something that they've done that's effective, and this is a good example of something having legs, is that they've been able to kind of build their marketing and a lot of their ad campaigns around ad campaigns that they've done. And I think that that's rather meta, but I think that that's a good example of showing strength. Geico can use the cavemen or the wee little pig in a different ad and not explain why it's there, but we know why it's there because of stuff that they've done before, which was something that was a new idea at the time. On the flip side of that, something that's a little bit more traditional in the sense of, I think, great creative is we see a lot of, especially in design, a lot of simplification, a lot of minimalization of things that some people either do or don't like, but there tends to be a trend with that. And it isn't really something that is all that modern. I've found a lot of design, especially a lot in logos, we tend to have to showcase to our clients and kind of help them explain why we think, you know, the creative work we put out is good because of the strength that it has. Typically, the logo doesn't need to say that much. It doesn't need to be that vibrant. There's a difference between, you know, grabbing attention and being attention grabbing. We don't want something to be loud for the sake. We just want it to, like we were talking about head and heart, you know, something recognizable and moving. But if we put together a mark that we explain to the client and we say that this has strength, this has legs, because what you can do with this logo is how it applies to, it can animate in certain ways that we present to them. And we show now you have, you know, animations that you could put at the beginning of videos, or if you start doing a podcast, this is how the logo works. How does it apply on the side of a truck or the side of a building to the top left-hand corner of a mobile app. Those kind of things that you have to consider kind of affect the design process in the sense where keeping something simple might actually help give the logo that strength. And it's really what will carry it forward. And then that's something, again, you'll recognize as great creative later down the line when it's still being used. The best example I could think of is the Chase Bank example. I use that all the time as a kind of a case study for logos. And you see this actually a lot in the financial industry as well, but also just in general with design. If you kind of look at logo history, you can go back and you'll find that typically what a company is using now, for a company that's older especially, there's something that usually happens around within the 60s or within like the late 70s, early 80s that they kind of stick with. And a lot of logos will kind of go back to that. And that's just because they kind of had an idea that worked then. And it's the simplicity of that mark that they realized we could actually do a lot more with this. And especially with what we have to produce now, we have a multitude of media that requires branding or requires creative attention. And so the ability to adapt whatever we're working or designing for, you need to make sure you can place that in the right way so it's visible. Because if you don't see it, then no one will know if it's creative at all.
Yeah. Listen, thank you so much for those thoughts. I'm one of the things that really struck me that you said, and I'll just sort of emphasize it a little bit, is the strength and the confidence that comes from subtlety and simplicity, right? In your creative, and that can mean a message that's an implied message in and of itself. The very example you brought up about the Geico cavemen, and while we don't see them too much anymore, but there was a time where they just showed, the caveman. The one I'm thinking of is he was in an airport, right? And he was on one of those, I'll call it a treadmill, but like a moving sidewalk kind of thing. And he passed some, some poster of an actual caveman, and he just sort of looked disgruntled, and and that's all. That was it.
I believe it's them showing their old ad of "It's so easy a caveman could do it."
Yeah, that was it. That was
kind
it.
of, yeah.
But they showed a caveman actually sparking fire or something simple. And he was the guy in the airport was obviously insulted. And but that subtlety, and then at the end they just said Geico, even a caveman could do it or something. But that was it. No words, right? Just airport music. And it really spoke to the confidence of the Geico brand and product, I believe. And of course the creative execution that they were in the midst of. Nick, listen, thank you. Let me move to you, Jill, if I may. And I'm going to ask you, you already brought up a couple of good examples with Progressive, I believe. But what else stands out in your mind is just great financial creative, and anything come to mind?
Well, and just to kind of go back on the Geico, I just think it's interesting, the whole insurance category, right? Like even back in the day with Prudential, the Rock, Traveler, the Umbrella. So insurance kind of got it and has evolved. And then Geico kind of breaking, the barrier again in creative, and then Progressive and even Liberty Mutual on the heels of that. So I would say there are other campaigns that are, or things like I was thinking like Fearless Girl, right? So, I mean, that's creative, right? I mean, that wasn't necessarily like, I guess what we would consider traditionally a creative campaign. But to me, that's something that has moved, communities, it's moved boards, and it endures. And then just like in a totally different way, this is more to the enduring component of it, perhaps maybe even like Capital One, like what's in your wallet. Because again, it's just over the course of time, and there's still a ton that could be done with that, that hasn't been done. That's a campaign that has lasted, and that has, part of it for me is also like seeding the name of a firm in their target audience's mind, and attaching to that the attributes that you want to attach to that, and staying true to that story over time.
Yeah, Jill, thank you very much. Jim, let me ask you now, Jim, if I were to say, when E.F. Hutton speaks, what would you say? And I might miss you here because you demographically. Do you remember that campaign?
You're going to put me on the spot. I'm glad to say
right.
It might have been a little.
You're too young. I'll give you an out. You're too young. All right. But
that's the first time I've heard that for a while. So I hope this is being recorded because I'm playing that part back. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I will tell you, and that was, I totally did put you on the spot, but I'm gonna say it. And to totally get you off the hook, that brand was retired, I believe, in like 1984. Okay. Yeah. Right. And but many people, and I will say my age and older, maybe, but we'll remember, it's when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. And the ad campaign was, was apparently this guy, E.F. Hutton, when he was at a restaurant, he was about to give his opinion. And then suddenly, like, the restaurant shut up and just everyone sort of, everyone sort of went over like that. And that was their campaign. But my question to you is, you can envision it at least, and do understand that many people still remember it, however many years that equates to, 35, something like that. How important is the memorability of factor in great creative?
Totally depends, right? Another hedge of an answer. I think back to Jill's question to you. It depends on what her answer, and she started to talk about it. It's great to build recall and recognition around a brand, around a product, a service, a name. If it's disruptive, sometimes you want to build recall around a platform or a certain message that you can graduate in time. So you might be very disruptive upon market entry, and you might be increasingly less disruptive. So I think it goes back to the strategy of the campaign. What are you trying to accomplish? What is the need set of it? And I know that's such a wonkish answer, although it's probably true.
Yeah, no, you know what? I will agree with you on that. Or, I will say you're right. It does. If memorability, is not part of your strategic objectives, it might be nice, but it's not necessary, right? I mean, as much as we want it to be. E.F. Hutton is a great example because, they're out of business, but everyone's remembering them. Not terribly practical, though excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim, thank you very much. Let me see, Nick. Let me move to you, if I may, sir. What's your feeling about that very question about the importance of a creative message being memorable in an audience's mind?
Yeah, certainly. I think it helps. Again, kind of what I was alluding to before with the strength of kind of any sort of creative coming forward. I think that memorability is always good because it's kind of what I would define as like subconscious marketing, in the sense where you kind of always get free publicity for someone remembering it. Like the old adage of like, no such thing as bad press. Just being remembered is something that is one less thing that someone needs to, put out an ad or market towards for, if someone just remembers it from something you might have done in the past. That being said, though, at the time when coming up with creative solutions, it could be hard to create something that is memorable, because we don't really have that luxury of looking back upon what we're doing. But I think that we have to at least use all the tools we have now, leverage our teammates and our colleagues, I think, to understand what can we do, and do we see this work that we're doing last years and years. We like to think that everything we do, especially from design for the financial sector, is often very conservative, in the sense where things have been done a certain way. And I think that it has to do with the sense where they want to show a sense of establishment and a sense of history, because that conveys a message of security. So making sure messages are memorable, I think, help add to that and can be a benefit for it. So we like to design, I think, and come up with solutions that we believe kind of fit that mold, because that is, I believe, the attitude and the message of the clients in that industry. So that's what I probably have to say about that with regards to how we approach it.
Yeah. Nick, thank you very much. Now, my friends, our clock is telling me that it's almost time for us to depart. I'm going to give my last question to you, Mark, if I may, and it's going to be a short and sweet one. And I'm going to ask you, is this a good time for creative in financial services? Is this a good time to be in this business?
I think absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. I think that they're going to start to enter their prime. I feel like from a creative perspective, I think that the opportunity is ripe for the picking, and I think it's time for marketers to be able to establish strong brands. You know, sort of moving forwards. I think there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of channels, and a lot of people willing to listen to your message as a brand. So yeah, I think absolutely, it's exciting.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much. And Paul, you got 30 seconds. I want your response to this, if you would.
I completely agree. I think people are becoming much more financially savvy, much more aware, much better educated about financial matters, and they're hungry for information. And you know, they're looking for it. And I think good financial creative, you know, could really touch a nerve and inspire action.
And I will tell you that for my own 2 cents, having been in this industry on my side of the podium, though, boy, this is I've never seen a more exciting time to be in creative, in financial, in marketing. The world is opening up, and I'm right. I know I'm really excited about it. Yeah. Well, listen, my panelists, what a fun conversation. I promised you it would go by quickly, and I kept that promise because it surely did. I want to thank our audience very much for joining us and for listening in on some of these terrific conversation points that we've been able to extract from this bright group. I want to thank our sponsors once again, who are Dianomi, Investing Channel, and Additions Financial. You guys rock. You guys make this all happen. Panelists, thank you so much. I hope to see you all soon. See you next time. Bye, guys.